Hey guys, it's Jack, and I want to talk about Drag Race Rusicals again. One of my most successful videos on my channel was a video I made back in March talking about the best and worst of Drag Race Rusicals. I hold pretty similar opinions to the ones that are in the video, but I still think there's more to be said about other Rusicals, and I just want to make a video a little better. My voiceover has improved, my quality has improved, going back and watching my older videos makes me cringe just a little bit. So I may end up talking about some topics I've already done videos on just because I think there could be more said, and I want to rank the Rusicals today. I love ranking videos so much regardless of what's being ranked because the format is just so entertaining to me. Something about a fully conclusive list of a topic being put out there is so satisfying to watch, and I hope to accomplish that today. And quickly, I'm not the first to do this topic, so shout out to both Mirror Mangle and Runner Eye for doing it. So with that out of the way, this is every Drag Race Rusical ranked, including the international seasons. Coming in dead last, just like last time, let's talk about the Farmer Rusical. It's going to be very apparent super early on to this ranking that a lot of the bottom ones just aren't that funny. And if any of them truly don't make me laugh at all, it would be the Farmer Rusical outside of maybe the caulk joke. I already went into pretty good detail about this in my last video, and I still stand by a lot of those points. I think that there was only one good winner for this challenge. Because none of the characters were consistent and everyone was just kind of jumping around, the team captain could only be the one to really win. And that's true for Rusicals in general too. Some parts are just stacked up a lot better against other parts. At least in other Rusicals, a part is a single part, but here they're bouncing around and there's just no direction at all. Not to mention other random things like Andy Cohen just making an appearance on one of the teams where they're just holding up a green screen sign. It gave that team both a weird advantage and disadvantage because they had to do one less performance, but also it was one less role for them. It really just felt like not a lot of thought was put into this challenge, and it's interesting because we had another Rusical later on, and yet they still did this one early in the season. And yes, it definitely did have early season challenge growing pains. Social media, the unverified Rusical, is still bad like I said before. But with this one, I don't agree with some of the points that I made in my last video. I said that all the roles were written equally, and I don't really think that's true. Most of the roles were written equally, but equally bad. I think when I made that comment, I was trying to say that most of the roles were written in a way where they were consistent with performance or jokes, but then you look at Foxy and Tina's role, which the name is escaping me right now, and they are just a lot funnier or better written than the rest. I will still stand by that. I think it was complete bullshit to put Tina Burner that low for this challenge, and I really only think they did it to maybe try and push the rivalry between her and Rosé, but it really didn't go anywhere. If anything, putting Tina in the low placement with the role that can only challenge Foxy was not good because that means Rosé was basically running away with the win. She did do the best regardless, but still. When the only other two high placements were the duo of Gottmik and Denali, it was just a lot easier to give the solo win to Rosé than give the double win to both of them. And every other role didn't have a chance of winning because even though they got their little solo performance, they just weren't as memorable or standout-ish as Foxy. There's also just a confused vision overall when it comes to the performances. I think the story was alright. Sometimes the Rusicals parody other musicals pretty faithfully to the musical. The issue here is that it kind of picks and chooses iconic performances from musicals, but nothing is consistent. Rosé got a parody of Don't Rain on My Parade, then there was the Cell Block Tango moment. I think that was really great, but then sometimes for some of the performances, nobody got anything. It just seemed like a half-hearted attempt to make references to musicals rather than a full vision that they wanted to carry out. Next up, we have not Trump the Rusical, we actually have Glamazonian Airways. I know some people tend to vibe with this one, and I do understand why, but I watched it back and it's just not my favorite. It has pretty similar problems to the Farmer Rusical where no one really has set roles, but they each get a solo performance, so it's a little easier to follow. But then the other issue comes in with the fact that they're all dressed like flight attendants, and it's the second episode of the season, so that makes it harder to follow who's doing what. With it being very early on into season 7 too, a lot of the fashion queens were still struggling to perform well, so not a lot of risks were taken on Trixie's team. I love when people take the material and make it their own, but it really seemed like they were just reciting their lines and trying to get the performance over with, or they just really didn't have a performer's perspective of how they can make it extra entertaining. Ginger's team was kind of the opposite. They were a lot more campy and they had more understanding of how their performance was going to look if they added extra things, so they were more entertaining, but it wasn't enough to save this performance. Some of the sketches though are again iconic, so I do understand why people enjoy this. I definitely laughed a little more at this one than the Farmer Rusical.
Is that sanitary?
And now we get to Trump the Rusical, where I went hard on the first video, but I don't really hate it as much anymore. Yeah, 20-second isn't really that great of a placement, but I'm more entertained by it now than I was in the past. The best thing about this Rusical is that they did really try to make it work. It still falls a little flat, and I think the Grease parody was still confusing, but I know they had an idea going into writing of how they wanted to do this, and I have to respect that. And going back to what I mentioned just a second ago, the queens really made their rules their own in this challenge, and that's great. Evie doing something like flashing the judges in that manner is something that is so signature Evie and something that I could only really see her doing. But also for every person who made a rule their own, another person fell into the background, so I can't give it too much credit. And finally, the music has gotten stuck in my head a lot since I made that last video, so when ranking everything and seeing the performances, it ranks pretty low, but it's also pretty catchy.
Ruco Enterprises, how can I help you?
This one is cheating just a little bit, but I do want to talk about twerking 5 to 9 from Secret Celebrity Drag Race just so I get the full list of Rusicals. I bet a lot of you forgot this one even happened because obviously Secret Celebrity Drag Race season 1 was kind of a fever dream. And when I first watched the episode, I wasn't that impressed, but when watching it back, I do kind of appreciate it a little more. Like with most of Secret Celebrity Drag Race, it's just fun. I just love watching RuPaul and all the judges and all the queens being super happy with everything that's going on. And these 3 women are all great performers in their own right. Obviously, drag is kind of a curveball when it comes to it, so their performances weren't the absolute best, but they were really trying and they were having a good time. Is this one as memorable? Not really, but if it's on, I'll watch it and I'll probably have a good time with it. And now we get our first international pick with Holland Season 2's version of Cinderella. From this point on, I think there's something worthwhile to watch about each of these Rusicals, and I think they're all pretty good, but something has to land close to the bottom, and this is where we get Cinderella. There were some really good performances, a lot of the queens went for it, even if it didn't always land. I like the switch-ups they tried to do to make the characters have more diversity, like having the sisters be Ariel and Snow White and all that. They also made the ball a club instead, and Prince Charming into kind of this DJ type of figure. It was interesting, and I think this is where it kind of falls off. Obviously, they didn't want to play the Cinderella story super straight, so they had to drag it up a little bit, and I just don't think it worked as well when it came time for the performance. Like at the end, Cinderella ends up with the wolf, who's also partially Little Red Riding Hood, and it's funny, but also I'm just confused a little bit. It's not bad, just a little bit forgettable, and the music itself is not catchy either. Up next, we have the life of Rafaela Carrà. I tried. Like with Secret Celebrity Drag Race Season 1, Drag Race Italia is such a fever dream. Obviously, I'm not super familiar with the artist, but I did listen to some of her music, and she is so talented. As a tribute, I really like what they did, and I think it hit a lot of the marks they wanted to hit, but it's just not hitting for me because I'm not super familiar. So for me, I can't really justify putting it any higher because you kind of have to have a little bit of a background for it, but the performances were good. My biggest issue, which I really don't want to count against this Rusical, is the editing was a little messy. It does hurt my overall viewing experience, which is why it ended up a little lower. Just a lot of close-up shots, quick cuts, and shots to things that don't really need to be seen at that moment. For a lot of it, they were on stage as pairs of 2, and there would be a lot of cuts to the performer who wasn't really performing at that point, just dancing along, and that was just distracting to me. Overall, it was good, but I just can't justify putting it any higher.
What is she doing here?
All of these Rusicals from this point on, I have gone back and watched after the episode aired just because I wanted to see them again. Let's talk about the West End Wendy's first. If you want the biggest example of UK versus the world's tight budget, look no further than this episode, where basically every other episode for the season could kind of get away with the fact that they were on a smaller budget. Here, it's just so noticeable. Just one stage, each of them gets a little prop, but then it's some chairs, a table, and a piano. They did the most they could with it, but I feel like they could have done more with this concept. I really do like the concept itself, but it didn't really seem like a lot of the writing was writing it to be funny, so most of them just fell flat. Janie's role was funny because it's playing into Meryl Streep, who we all know pretty well, and I think Pangina's role as Annie was funny only because she really went for it. There's just something about this Rusical in particular that is a little uncomfortable to me almost, but that's just like UK versus the world as a whole. This Rusical subverts our expectations of what a normal Rusical is like, and not in a good way. I I don't know, it's just something about the lack of interaction between anyone. Everyone just goes onto the stage by themselves and leaves up until the very end where they are all on stage together, but just for a second. I don't need backup dancers, but just a little interaction between the queens throughout the Rusical makes it feel like a more complete product, and we just didn't get that here. I do get that it was supposed to be some form of audition process for them to get back into a show, but to me, the format just doesn't really work well for a Rusical. Up next, we have our other Holland Rusical, Maxima. Much like with Rafaela, I am not very familiar with Maxima, but this Rusical does a little more to provide a little more context. You have Fred on the sidelines narrating it, and it gives us a little more context if you don't really know what's going on. But the thing that ranks it above the past entries are some of these performances are just stellar. I am ready to call Janie the queen of Rusicals because every performance that she gives is so good. She alone justifies it being here. There's not a ton else I can say. It's good, I just can't really relate to it, again, because I'm not from the home country and I don't have a ton of the context.
I screwed up all those words!
And now we have the second season 10 Rusical, Cher, the unauthorized Rusical. Nothing about this Rusical, aside from the headpiece that Monet was forced to wear, is that bad. There's just nothing that's extremely memorable. I totally will commend them for singing live because it's already very hard to do, and then they had to do it in the Cher voice, which I did find very entertaining. The live singing helped this Rusical to both stand out and also takes away points because there's some sloppy parts like Asia messing up the words, stuff like that. It's tough because I really don't want to rank this that low because this is one of my favorite formats they've done for the Rusical and all the queens really went for it. But when you start to compare it to the rest of the Rusicals on the list, at least for me, I would rather watch those instead of this one. We've gotten this type of unauthorized Rusical twice on the US series of Drag Race, and I really do hope we see it again. I gotta commend this one because it was the first. It was more than serviceable enough to warrant a second and better outing, but I just struggled to find a lot of things to say about it.
The Soul Diva, Jaya.
OPM Divas from Drag Race Philippines is super fun to watch. Like with a lot of the international seasons, I don't have a ton of the context, but the characterization and what these queens do and the reactions of the judges give me what I need. Do I know the names of the divas that pop up? Not really, but as soon as the queen walks out, I understand what they're going for. And that's just a testament to how fun and energy-filled these Filipino queens are. Beyond that, I think it was just such good vibes. The judges were really enjoying themselves. And I think there's enough variation between each of these divas that anyone could really stand out. My biggest issue is the inconsistency with the background dancers and the queens just going out by themselves. Some queens got the help of background dancers to make their performance a little better. Other queens didn't, and they were just out there kind of crawling around the stage. It was again inconsistent, and it reminds me of the West End Wendy's. There's more interaction here, but it still feels like they have a lot of the stage to fill up. Overall though, I could definitely see this one growing on me, and I need to watch it back in the future.
Ronnie, you always do that.
Next up, we get to the other most recent Rusical, Squirrel Trip from Canada Season 3. Everything about this Rusical screams above average to me. There were two performances that were lackluster, everyone else did pretty great, a lot of little things to bring on the characterization, great line delivery, and something that I didn't notice up until this Rusical that adds points to its list is the fact that this one was done in all one take. There are other Rusicals where there's cuts between things, like there's sparkles that go up on the screen and then suddenly we're on a new scene. It's a scene change, which is totally fine, but the vibe of this one really gives me musical, and I enjoy that a lot. The queens were on stage the entire time, which means they had to stay in character and react to things like you would have to do in a real musical. The biggest complaint is that it does start to drag in some areas, like Giselle and Irma's number was a little hard to get through, but overall it's super inoffensive and I would watch it again.
Manager.
I really love Kardashian the Rusical for a lot of different reasons. Watching it back now, it feels like such a time capsule for this era of the Kardashians, and it's interesting to go back and see where they were at that point in their life. The music is super catchy, and I think the writing, when it's good, it's so good. But of course, this is the most egregious example of the fact that roles are not always written equal. Regardless of who you think should have had Blac Chyna, it was a role written to win the challenge. Chris also did have a very good chance of winning, but no one told Alexis her outfit was basic. Anyways, I also didn't really like how it ended. I know it's all stupid and all for good fun, but I think that just having this whole future concept of Northwest, it was just so stupid. Regardless of this Rusical format, this is one of the best, and I would love to watch it again soon.
Nope.
Now let's move on to the US divas. A lot of it is extremely iconic, but if we're talking about lopsided roles, this is another great example. No one was going to beat rapping Julie Andrews or topical Mariah Carey, so a couple stellar performances like Chi-Chi's or Aja's got overlooked even though they killed it. Not to mention, this was the first time where logistics of the Rusical started to come out and see like why certain people may be placed lower. Before Thorgy stood up for herself and asked to be in more parts of the Rusical, it never really dawned on me that, oh yeah, some of these queens are in the background as dancers, while other queens don't get that same opportunity. Obviously, I still think the Rusical itself is really great, but now with so many other Rusicals coming out, it's kind of fallen by the wayside. Now that we have a ton of other iconic performances from recent years, it helps me to take my rose-colored glasses off and see everything that this represents: a lot of rigging.
To get to the other jokes!
Under the Big Top is an interesting one because it came out a couple months before I made that video, but I never thought that people liked it that much. But now watching it back, I do really get why it's so popular, and I really started to enjoy it too. It's another live singing challenge, and again, that both helps and hurts. Cynthia especially, it makes me want to come back just to hear her sing. Something that I didn't mention earlier that is super important here is that live singing can help you bring extra characterization as well. You can only do so much in a recording, but if you can really feel out the vibe and be like, okay, I'm gonna go for it and do something live, it could really win you the challenge. And I think here Pythia had one of the strongest performances because they pulled out all the tricks that could only happen if they were singing live. Live singing overall can just add extra layers to her performance, or in other cases like we see here with Eve or the trio, it makes it extra cringy, but it's a good cringy here. It used to be pretty tough to go back and watch Eve's performance especially, but now it has become so memed and so iconic, I just go back and watch this specific part only. For a concept as basic as this one is on paper, they cover a lot of ground with it.
Aren't we all just men in wigs?
We've entered the top 10, and I don't think it's a surprise to anyone when I say that Bitch Perfect is super entertaining. It's a pretty basic concept, and they use RuPaul songs as the material, but for some reason, it just all works so well. Maybe it's because I'm a sucker for acapella or everything is just super catchy, but I've caught myself coming back to this one more than almost every other Rusical. It should have a lot of the same problems a lot of the bottom Rusicals have. There's no specific characters, they all are just kind of plain stereotypes, but not really. But I think what makes it work so well is that the pacing doesn't really let you think about it. It ping-pongs between the groups so fast, and the choreography is so fluid and fun that you're not really thinking about the characters at all. Chi-Chi's choreography and her performance specifically are some of the best of the entire franchise. It's overall a super good time, but the format keeps it from being any higher because though the groups are great, I don't really see a lot of character. But if I base this list off of what got stuck in my head the most often, Lake Lake Titty Titty Caca Titty Titty would be at the top. Up next, we have the drag calling from Drag Race España Season 2. If there's any Rusical that feels the most like a musical, it is definitely this one. I commended Canada's Drag Race Season 3 because all the queens had to be on stage the entire time. That's not true here, but the amount of dialogue and numbers and everything that these queens need to remember is insane for this show. They filmed these episodes on a pretty strict time crunch, and this Rusical was 18 minutes long. That is so much performance to remember, and all of these queens nailed it. And with it being 18 minutes long and not that many queens being in it, they don't need to rush into numbers. I catch myself watching this Rusical as if it's just a regular musical because there's so much dialogue and so much downtime in between numbers. It's written in a way where we understand these characters and they basically have a full arc over this 18 minutes. It's not rushed at all or brushed aside for comedy, they really give a lot of time to it, and I have to respect that. Not to mention, so many of these queens sound so good. I mean, Georgie, come on. All of the jokes land. My memory may be failing me at this moment, but it seems like a lot of it was improvised. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it feels like they've been rehearsing this for months and this is their opening night and they're really getting into it. It's just so good and so faithful to musicals.
Bang, bang!
It's the classic, we all know and love it. Some of you may be surprised to not see it higher, Herstory of the World. This Rusical has a very similar problem to the divas from All Stars 3. It's written very lopsidedly, and only some of the rules are written to win. But what this one has over divas is original songs that are all so funny. You can use RuPaul songs and get a lot out of them. There's still a couple on the list above that will be using RuPaul songs, but I think the writing here for Herstory of the World is so fun, and it's so suited to each of these queens. In both All Stars 2 and All Stars 3, they were cast into the role of the historical figure or diva that fit them best. So So even if the roles weren't written equally, it allowed for the queens to perform in a level of comfortableness. And when a role for a queen is written for both them and written well, we get some iconic performances like Alyssa as Annie Oakley. I don't think I need much justification for why it's this high, maybe just a little justification for why it's not in the top 5. It's been 6 years since this Rusical came out, which is crazy, and I just think that there's some better ones that have come out after. For the time and what we've seen up to Rusicals at that point, I think it was one of the best, but now the formats have changed and it's just fallen by the wayside. I feel like Rats the Rusical shouldn't be as good as it is. This may be the most biased pick because I do know a lot about Cats the musical, which I'm a little ashamed of, but here it just hits so well. Even though it's just a lot of poop and disease jokes, I think the writing here is super strong and it's just doubled in quality by this cast of queens. We all know that UK Series 2 queens are some of the best of the franchise, and that is so true here. Before making this video, I was so against live singing, but after watching back-to-back Rusicals, the ones that are live tend to have some funny moments that you wouldn't get anywhere else. I feel like if you don't know a ton about Cats, you may not enjoy this one as much as I do, but because I know so much, it's so entertaining. This is parody done right, and if they want to parody more musicals in the future, they should look back to this one.
Death drop! Sublime!
Up next, we have the Hall of Fame halftime show. I'll get the negative out of the way really quick. It seemed like the choreography and the stage placement was odd for this whole thing. People like Jan and TKB were given a stage and then the whole floor, but then Eureka was up on this tiny platform the entire time. It was just kind of strange how they did it all. And then people like Raja and Kylie were given very little choreography, which was kind of faithful to the people they were impersonating, but still, I feel like they could have been justified in the bottom, but I'm glad they weren't. Anyways, with that out of the way, this is just so fun. This is totally another Rusical that is carried by the cast who all do an insanely good job. They all gave great performances, and you can argue that some queens maybe emulated their star a little less, but no performance is distractingly bad in any way, and the great performances are literally the star on stage. No offense to Jan fans, but if the runway wasn't taken into consideration, this should have been TKB's second win. I've started to become a growing Beyonce fan, and seeing TKB perform in that way, it is jaw-dropping how similar it is. Don't get me wrong, Jan's Gaga is amazing too, but I think it's just 10 times harder to emulate Beyonce, and also there was that little storyline back in season 6 with Bianca and TKB talking, and this was fulfilled in this episode. So good. I think overall this is one of the best challenges of the franchise, but it's not the best Rusical because it's not very musical-esque. So I didn't want to put it any higher because even though the performances are insanely good, I can't really call it a full musical Rusical. And this is true for the next one on the list, the Las Vegas Review. I wasn't too sure if this one was a Rusical. I kind of go back and forth, but the wiki says it is, so I'm just gonna follow that. 2/3 of this can be considered a Rusical, and then the last one, obviously there's original lyrics, so much is up in the air, but it's still such a quality, iconic performance, I need to include it. The mirror scene especially is one of the greatest things Drag Race has ever done in the entire franchise. It says so much in such a subtle and musical way, and I appreciate it, and I get goosebumps and get tears in my eyes every time I watch it. If any moment from the season won the show an Emmy, it could or should be this one. I'll save most of my thoughts on this because I may want to do a video on it down the line, but it really means a lot to me, and I just love it so much. And then we get to Losing is the New Winning, which in itself is so catchy and so fun. The way they choreograph it, the props they use, everything is so dynamic, and you never really know what's gonna come next. The queens ending on this high of a note makes me want to see another Rusical in this form. It's really just good vibes all around. The Thai musical from Drag Race Thailand Season 2 is a full-on production. The shots, the angles, the full warehouse that they're in, I've never seen anything like it, and I'm so glad they did it. Each of these queens has such an interesting character, and it's all centered around the guest star, which I think is so fun. The music, the choreography, everything about this is so dynamic, like I've been saying with a lot of these top-tier Rusicals. The entertainment is so universal, and the songs are so memorable. I really need you guys to check this one out.
She's a man with one eye!
It's the classic. Let's finally talk about Shade the Rusical. It falls into the issue of having some of the roles that don't really stand out, but it's just so iconic that I can't really justify putting it any lower. The storyline of having both of the idol singers being Penny, basically the lead role, is so interesting, and I think it played out so well here. It's another example of how amazing live singing can be, with Bianca's little quips, more energy in their voices, and some funny mess ups. Where I think Herstory of the World and Divas have started to fall off with time, I think Shade has still been consistently really great. The high highs and the low lows of live singing are more captivating and make me want to come back more than if just someone messed up a lip sync. So in the long run, Shade just has this longevity and staying power that makes it number 3.
Saltine!
When I first did the best and worst of the Rusicals video, it was right after Moulin Rouge aired. I said that I liked it, but I needed to watch it again. I've watched it again many times, and I can now consider it one of the best. I've learned that with this Rusical, RuPaul songs can go a long way to make it really entertaining. The way they implement the songs, it makes sense because Moulin Rouge was already a jukebox musical. And just like with the Thai musical, we had the guest stars featuring in the Rusical, which was so fun. Honestly, any single one of the roles could have won. Even the group of 4 had very standout performances that could have nabbed them the win. It's partially because they were based off of real people, and we knew who those real people were with Lady Marmalade, so it helped with characterization. And the viewing experience itself is helped by these crazy camera angles that they do on stage for the first time ever. It was jarring to see at first, but I love it now. I think this is the most consistent and well-made soundtrack as well. I catch myself listening to a lot of the songs from it. It overall is just such good quality, and I hope they take notes from this one rather than social media.
I made a video in Paris.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, there was no switch up. Madonna the Rusical is still my number 1. The music is great, any performance could win. I wasn't even the most familiar with Madonna before this, but it really encapsulated her career and I understood it regardless. I love the choreography, I love everyone cheering. I think it's just such a comfort experience for me that brings out the best vibes. Every single queen gave it their all, and even if there were slight mess ups, they didn't dwell on them whatsoever. It's a truly magical performance, and I hope this video makes you want to watch it again. And that was every Drag Race Rusical ranked. I hope you enjoyed. To me, this is one of the most fun challenges, even though there are some logistics that hold it back from being the most fair. When a Rusical is good, I will watch it for months on end, and when it's bad, I just forget about it the next day. At the end of the day, this is all my opinion, so if you disagree, comment below and just be nice about it. I love ranking videos, so I'm gonna do some more in the future. I'll see you guys soon with another video.